The men came after midnight. They wrapped their horses' hooves in burlap so no one would hear them ride in. They wore hoods, and by the time the family inside the farmhouse understood what was happening, the barn was already burning. This was Calloway County, Kentucky. The year was 1908, and the men setting the fire were not strangers. They were neighbors, farmers, church-going men who, by daylight, you might have shaken hands with in Murray. They called themselves the Silent Brigade. Welcome back to Dark History of the Jackson Purchase, where we dig up the stories that happened right here in Calloway, Marshall, and Graves counties, the ones your great-grandparents lived through and mostly refused to talk about. Today, the tobacco war that put this county under martial law. To understand why good men put on hoods, you have to understand what tobacco meant here. In the early 1900s, dark-fired tobacco wasn't just a crop in western Kentucky. It was the economy. It was how you paid your mortgage, fed your children, and made it to spring. This whole region, the Black Patch they called it for the dark leaf grown here, lived and died by the price of tobacco. And then a man named James Buchanan Duke decided what that price would be. Duke's American Tobacco Company had swallowed its competitors and formed what people simply called the Trust. With no rivals left to bid against, the Trust could offer whatever it wanted. And what it wanted was to pay less than it cost to grow the crop. Farmers who had worked the same ground for generations were suddenly losing money on every harvest. Some lost their farms outright. They were being ruined, slowly, by a company hundreds of miles away that would never see their faces. So in 1904, the farmers organized. They formed the Planters Protective Association, and the idea was simple and peaceful. If everyone refused to sell to the Trust at robbery prices, if they all held their tobacco back together, the Trust would have to raise the price. Strength in numbers, a union of dirt and leaf. But it only worked if everyone held the line, and not everyone did. There were always a few farmers. Folks called them hillbillies in the language of the day, who broke ranks and sold to the Trust for a little quick cash, undercutting everyone else. To the men losing their farms, these neighbors weren't just competitors, they were traitors. Out of that anger, a harder faction was born. Led by a country doctor from Caldwell County named David Amos, they organized in secret along military lines and gave themselves names that sounded like a fraternity and operated like a militia. The Silent Brigade, the Inner Circle. The newspapers called them the Night Riders. At first, Calloway County stayed quiet. The association was strong here, but the violence was happening elsewhere. The Night Riders had already stormed entire towns, capturing Princeton, then Hopkinsville, then Russellville, dynamiting warehouses and burning the Trust's tobacco by the ton. Then, in the first days of January 1908, it came home. Two Calloway County farmers, Henry Pace and Roland Norsworthy, walked out to their fences one morning and found notes tacked to the rails. The message was plain: do not sell to the Trust. Join the association, or your next visit will be worse. Norsworthy understood exactly what that meant. He took out an advertisement in the Murray Democrat, announcing that he would be joining the association after all, in print, so everyone would know he'd fallen in line. The pressure moved to Kirksey, a small community in the north of the county. A band of some 75 riders visited local men, John Washer, a couple of others, and a store owner named John Fulton, warning them to support the association or face the consequences. Fulton didn't wait to find out what those consequences were. He started moving his entire store inventory out of the county to Paducah, and the barns began to burn. A farmer named Glenn Rogers sold his crop to a trust buyer. Soon after, his tobacco barn went up in flames. This was no longer someone else's fight. It was here. Then came the night of February 6th, 1908. Somewhere between 35 and 50 riders converged on the farms of Hugh Lawrence and Washington Vicker. This was not a warning. This was punishment. They burned nearly 20,000 pounds of tobacco, a fortune in leaf, along with the barns that held it. When Hugh Lawrence confronted them, they shot him, in the cheek and in the hand. They shot his son in the leg. And on the Vicker farm, the riders found a black tobacco laborer named Lowe. Lowe had no stake in the politics of the trust. He was a working man, caught in the middle of a war between white farmers and a distant corporation. The night riders beat him nearly to death and rode off into the dark. It's a part of this story that's easy to leave out, and shouldn't be. The people who suffered most in the Black Patch War were often the ones with the least say in it. By now, Kentucky's newly elected governor, Augustus Wilson, had had enough. The problem was that local law couldn't touch the night riders, because in many places, the local law was the night riders. Sheriffs, jurors, respected men, they rode too, or they looked away. Juries in western Kentucky almost never convicted a night rider, because half the county was one, and the other half was too afraid to say so. So Wilson went over their heads. He placed Calloway County under martial law and sent in the state guard. He put a $500 bounty on the night riders, and then he made a promise that told you exactly how desperate things had become. He announced that if you killed a night rider and were convicted for it, he would pardon you. He was, in effect, declaring open season on the masked men. The war didn't end with a single dramatic battle. It just ran out of fuel. The state guard made arrests. The masks became more dangerous to wear. And around the same time, the trust finally blinked and raised its prices, which meant the farmers no longer needed to hold their crops back, and the whole reason for the violence began to dissolve. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court declared Duke's American Tobacco Company an illegal monopoly and ordered it broken apart. The farmers had, in a sense, won. The price came up. The trust came down. But almost no one was ever punished for what happened on those farms. The men who burned the barns and beat their neighbors mostly took off their hoods, went back to their fields, and lived out the rest of their lives as ordinary citizens of this county. Their descendants are still here. So are the descendants of the people they terrorized. That's the uncomfortable thing about local history. It isn't about strangers. It happened on roads you drive every day, to families whose names are still in the phone book. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting with a story that doesn't have easy heroes. Follow the page so you don't miss the next one. Next time, we're telling the story of the Calloway County melon farmer who may have invented the radio before Marconi and died alone and forgotten in a cabin outside Murray. Until then, keep your porch light on.